Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 23 of our reading of A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir by Lady Trent, and it is a book by Marie Brennan. Now, let's go over the copyright information, which should be on your screen right now, and I have to find it in the book. Says A Natural History of Dragons, copyright 2013 by Bryn Noonschwander. All rights reserved. Interior illustrations by Todd Lockwood, maps by Rhys Davies, and designed by Greg Collins. And I believe in the last part, which it's been a week since I recorded one of these, so remembering what happened the previous week is kind of sketchy sometimes. But anyways, in the last part, Isabella Camhurst went to return the firestone that she had taken from the dragon ruins, but found that it was crawling with smugglers. And even one of the Boyer's men, so one of the higher officials. So then she realized that, maybe that people were trying to play a trick on her and, with the whole Zangar Mat thing, the whole evil dragon thing. And they're planning a way to maybe uncover this falsehood. And we're going to pick up where we left off. I'm probably going to have to go back a few paragraphs because I don't remember where exactly I left off. Okay. We're going to start probably a little ways back. I apologize about that, but I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Okay. I snapped my fingers at a sudden thought. Dagmara, the day I seemed so uneasy coming out of the sauna, before the first footprints appeared. Did you see anyone hanging about as you approached? She shook her head, but it proved nothing either way. The trickster would have wanted to stay hidden, some kind of device to make the sound, Lord Hilford said, from where he slouched in his favorite chair, hands steepled before him. He'd been very quiet through my entire tale, brows drawn close, eyes staring into the middle distance as if watching a scene no one else could see. It sounds either like a bull roarer, perhaps. The footprints, it's hard to be both controlled and subtle with fire. Mr. Wilker also snapped his fingers. I had not realized we shared that habit. Not fire, acid, a strong acid that could burn the grass like that. It would be easy to pour out in an appropriate shape. I smelled something around the print. I thought that could be it. Means and motive, Lord Hilford said, sounding like a barrister. Opportunity. They're sneaky bastards, smugglers, Mr. Wilker said, begging Mrs. Camhurst's pardon. This puzzle, once entered into, seemed to have distracted him from his annoyance with me. Sneaky enough to be in and out of the village without being seen, in broad daylight even? Jacob asked dubiously. Dagmara spoke up, startling us all. Revka's lover, maybe. No one would think anything of seeing him skulking about at night. After all, could you ask her if he's been about lately? That earned me a frown. I had overstepped my boundaries again, meddling in village business. I raised my hands to placate her. We must do something to stop it. Guessing isn't enough. If Revka will help us, we can simply speak to the man. Otherwise, we must, lay in wait, I suppose. The phrase was calculated to conjure suitably alarming images. Dagmara's nod was grudging, but there. I will go now. She suited actions to words without delay. Once she was gone, Jacob turned to me. You say one of the Boyer's men was with the smugglers, supervising them, I confirmed. Lord Hilford, do you think the man was acting on his own behalf? Collaborating with the smugglers, as it were? Corruption among the Boyer's guards, Jacob said. He might be grateful to us for informing him. Lord Hilford blew out his mustaches with a thoughtful sigh. Perhaps, but think of what we know of Kurzov. He is ambitious, and connected in Chiavora. The man might have been there to make certain the Boyer got his fair share. Would he do that? I asked, scandalized. Recall, I spent my youth reading scientific works, not sensational novels. Manda Lewis could have told me all about the motif of corrupt noblemen. The Earl shrugged. I wouldn't be half surprised if he stops the smug. I wouldn't be half surprised if he stops the smugglers. He can usually confiscate everything they had, but then no others will follow them along this route. He'd kill the goose that lays the golden egg, so to speak. By letting them carry out their business for a modest bribe, he can enjoy a continuing profit with no effort on his part, and that's presuming he's not an opium eater himself. You met him, Mr. Wilker said. Did he seem like one? It earned him a snort. How many opium eaters are there in my acquaintance that I should know the signs? That companion of his might be an addict, Gaetano Rossi, but they go hunting a great deal, from what Astomir said, which sounded rather more active than I'd expected from an opium eater. Dagmara returned before long. We knew by her frown that it hadn't gone as we'd hoped. Revka hadn't seen him since this one went chasing after them, she said with a jerk of her hand at me. Hadn't I once been determined to reach her the proper manners of a lady Hadn't I once been determined to teach her the proper manners of a lady's maid? Well, too late for that now, and not much use. That doesn't mean he hasn't been here, Mr. Wilker said. Lord Hilford snorted. You're a young man yet, Tom. If you were skulking about the village on orders to scare the visitors away, would you pass up a chance to visit your pretty young widow? Mr. Wilker flushed, gaze darting at me as if trying to decide how to use my presence to make the Earl stop speaking so coarsely. He neither received nor needed a chance. Lord Hilford continued on as if unaware he'd said anything inappropriate. Right then. We need to catch our culprit in the act. It's better that way. Regardless. Will he or they can't discard the possibility of there being more than one. Will they wait until after we've attended this darned Sabbath to show it's doing no good, or will they try to force us out faster? Privately, I suspected there was only one. I would explain why Jacob and I had that period of quiet after our purification in the river. The fellow had to chase off after Lord Hilford instead, and it would be harder to keep multiple men out of sight. But I agreed with Jacob when he said, it doesn't much matter either way. The obvious thing to do is to keep watch every night until we catch somebody, but how shall we do it? I let the gentlemen discuss the logistics of it. They were far better at planning such things than I. The difficulty, of course, was that we could not look to the villagers for help. They were convinced Zangrit Mott haunted the night, and the only way we could persuade them otherwise was to bring proof of fakery. My gaze fell upon Dagmara. Rising and going to her side, I murmured, "Do you believe us? That it isn't a monster?" She shrugged and answered in a pragmatic tone, "If it is a monster, you'll see it soon enough. If it isn't, either way, I want this to end." For once, she and I were in complete accord. We were none of us spies, nor detectives either. The final plan, if I may call it that, without laughing, which I confess rather difficult to do, depended primarily upon the use of strong coffee. One gentleman would stay up each night, keeping watch for miscreants, and would rouse the others as soon as he heard anything. Mr. Wilker would take the first night, and Jacob the second. Judging by the way I saw them, whispering to each other, they were already plotting how to divide all the nights between their two selves. and spare Lord Hilford the duty of standing watch. I, of course, had already been exempted on account of my sex, though I suspect Jacob feared I would go charging after the perpetrator myself without first calling for aid. Privately, I calculated the odds of Mr. Wilker doing just that as roughly 80%. Wait, just making sure I didn't miss a page. Whether this would have succeeded in time, we never had the chance to discover. Have you ever awoken in the morning with the thought in your head that seemed to spring full grown from nowhere? I'm told that comes about because the mind ruminates upon topics while asleep and presents its conclusion when you wake, without any of the intervening steps. As such, it almost feels as if the thought came from a source outside yourself, an enlightening or unnerving sensation. Either the mind is capable of exercising the same process which the body is, while the body is awake, or mine is terribly sluggard, quite tardy in the presentation of its overnight conclusions. When I awoke the next morning, a bleary-eyed Mr. Wilker reported hearing nothing in the night, but Dagmara, coming in a moment later, told us there were footprints all around the village, as if the creature had been pacing a circuit of the place. This, of course, did not endure us to locals. I feared the smugglers might achieve their aim and drive us out before we even had a chance to make good on our Sabbath promise. The gentlemen went out, even the exhausted Mr. Wilker with guns in hand, to at least give a show of trying to address the supernatural threat. I gathered my things and went to use the sauna, for it was bathing day, or rather steaming day, and Dagmara had promised to keep watch while I was inside in case someone tried to haunt me again. But when I opened the sauna door, I found 3 withered old Drusinev aunties already occupying the place. It was no accident. They knew, for we had arranged it, that I always used the sauna first and alone, before the air cleared to the point where it was pleasant to breathe. Their glares dared me to protest or to join them. Even had I been accustomed to using the sauna communally, the atmosphere of hostile defiance, would have dissuaded me. I took refuge in the manners of a skirling gentlewoman. I murmured the politest Vestrani apology I knew and closed the door, for all the world as if it had been a simple misunderstanding. Then, fuming, I put my clothes back on and went back out into the bright air. At least I didn't have to explain to Dagmara. She had already found the auntie's clothing in the basket outside. Seeing me emerge so quickly, she scowled and muttered something under her breath that was not, I think, a polite apology. Together we began to trek back to the house. Partway there, my brain offered up its conclusion, quite without warning. I stopped dead on the path. The thought that had just occurred to me, seemingly out of nowhere, did not fit the chain of causality we were taking for granted. But that did not mean it was wrong. Carefully, step by step, I reviewed what I knew, half hoping I found something that would prove me wrong, almost entirely certain I would not. "Are you sick?" Dagmara hissed, stepping in front of me and stooping to peer into my blank face. I came back to myself with a jerk. "Dagmara, you know where everyone in the village lives, don't you?" Suspicion drew her brows together. "Why?" The girl was clever. I ignored her question and gave her the name, and it was enough. Her eyes narrowed. "What do you think you're going to find?" "Let's keep walking," I muttered, suiting action to words. The weather was developing quite fine, by Vestrani standards, anyways, and many of the village women were in their yards, tending the chickens and geese, or spinning wool into thread, or gossiping at their front gates. They were already staring at me because of Zangrit Mott, but I didn't want to give them additional reason. Dagmara followed me. That many tracks That many tracks would take quite a bit of acid, I said quietly to her. I used the skirling word, not knowing how to speak it in Vestrani, but my meaning was clear enough, came and where it came from is a good question. But there must be bottles of it on hand. If I can find those, it will be proof enough. I'll look for you, she offered. It was kindly meant, and I appreciated it, but with two one can keep watch, I said. I judged that less likely to put Dagmira's back up than the suggestion that she would not recognize acid if she saw it. There was not much call for such things up here, as they tan their furs by vegetable means, and though I was no chemist, I knew enough to be worried about her safety. Any acid strong enough to burn the grass could badly damage skin. One bit of luck, at least, was in our favor. My target's mother was bedridden and, according to Dagmara, spent most of her time asleep, so long as we were quiet, we could slip in and out with relative secrecy. We opted for disguise over skulking. Returning to the house, I collected my art supplies, and Dagmara and I sallied forth again in quite the wrong direction, as if looking for something suitable to draw. I sketched a view of Drustenev, something I should have done long since. Regardless, then wandered towards the edge of the village. Pausing for a flower, a rock, an interesting tree, I started to sketch a house, but got no more than 3 lines in before the woman charged up at her gate and sent me on my way with a harangue. Bit by bit, looking as if we were headed everywhere but our destination, Dagmara and I worked our way over to the right house. Once she had darted a quick glance inside to make certain it was clear, she kept watch at the door, and I slipped in. For this to be properly mysterious, I shall tell you about a secret panel hidden in the wall, or a trap door concealed beneath a rug, discovered only after an arduous search. But the truth is that I found the box shoved under a bench, and it took me no more than 2 minutes. Bottles of sulfuric acid labeled in Chiavorin, several of them empty and surrounded by charred straw, were where dribbles had tracked down the sides. The noise was faint, no more than a tap of foot by floor upon floor. My nerves were so tightly wound, though, that I shot upright and found Astomir standing in the door to the inner room. It's hard to say who was more horrified, him or me. He certainly broke the paralysis first. Astomir flung himself at the outer door before I could even think to shout, racing past a startled Dagmara and vaulting the low fence in one long-legged hurdle, scattering chickens everywhere. "Catch him!" I bellowed, but it was too late. By the time I reached the door myself, he was off down the slope, drawing plenty of perplexed stares, but no attempts to halt his flight. Of course not. Why should the villagers stop him? They had no idea that he was the man behind the so-called haunting. Dang it, I kicked the doorpost, which at least had the salutatory effect of hurting badly enough to bring me to my senses. From within the house, a querulous voice arose. Dagmara shoved past me to assure Astomir's mother with some kind of empty lie. Astomir, all along, I should have seen it. He'd guided me. He'd guided Mr. Wilker to find Lord Hilford. That must have gotten him opportunity to plant signs of Zangermatt. No wonder Jacob and I had enjoyed a few days of peace while he was gone. Come to that, Astomir had found the first print behind our house. He'd even been the one to cry out the monster's name, setting everyone's thoughts in the proper direction. But he'd also taken Lord Hilford and me to the ruins in the first place, and that did not fit with our smuggler theory at all. People were beginning to look towards Astomir's house. I could not blame them. We had made some amount of noise, or rather I had, and it was far too late to duck back inside and hope no one had seen me. I marshaled my Vestrani vocabulary, woefully inadequate though it still was. preparing a speech to explain matters to everyone. Fortunately, before I opened my mouth, I thought the better of it. Ducking my head back inside, I said, Dagmara, I'm afraid they'll think I've... Why did travelers' phrase books never include useful words like framed? Made it look like Astomir did this. One would think my weeks in Drustanev would have inured me to my own awkward phrasings, but no, I winced at the clumsy circumlocution. It might have been better if you explained matters. Okay, we still have plenty of time. After a moment, a tense moment, in which I could hear the suspicious whispers growing behind me, and the skin between my shoulder blades itched as if expecting something to hit it, Dagmara appeared in the inner doorway. She gave me a sour look, which I translated to mean that she knew I was foisting an unwelcome duty off to her, but could not argue with my logic. I pointed at the box of acid bottles, trying to be helpful. Muttering curses under her breath, she picked it up and went outside. She spoke far too rapidly for me to follow, of course. I concentrated more on the replies from the gathered crowd. They were the important part, after all. People did not seem convinced. I resisted the urge to prompt Dagmara. She could figure out for herself and tell them that the test would come tonight. If it passed peacefully, then it would prove our point, or at least start to. They wanted more than that, though. The mutters were still ugly. I bit my lip, thinking of what Mr. Wilker would say, then stepped up to Dagmara's side. In my best, most careful Vestrani, I said, if Dagmara is wrong, if the village is troubled again, then we will leave. I give you my word. It was, I thought, a reasonable gamble. I did not think Astomir would return. He had seen me with the bottles and would know I had exposed him for a fraud, not to mention that without his acid, he would be hard-pressed to burn any more mysterious prints into the ground. But it was nevertheless a gamble, and I held my breath after I finished speaking. The mutters sounded more promising, at least. I caught Mashutin's name once or twice, and Menkem's. Lord Hilford would be more than glad to talk to them, I offered inwardly. I began formulating a plan of how to ensure that I talked to Lord Hilford first, then discarded them. It might be better off if the gentlemen were not forewarned. This surprise of hearing Astomir accused would help allay suspicion that the skirling outsiders had colluded to frame a Drustanev lad. Come on, Dagmara said under her breath, shoving at me with the box of acid. Let them think it's over without you. I could only trust her judgment of her neighbors. Belatedly, I ducked inside to retrieve my art supplies, and then we made our way way toward the gate. The villagers parted around us like a reluctant sea, and back to our house. Part 4, in which many answers are found, not all of them pleasant, and some carrying an unfortunate price. 20. Chapter 20. The consequences of my bargain and an invitation from the boyar. In most cases, I believe the phrase tearing his hair out is meant metaphorically, but I'm fairly certain I saw a few strands caught between Mr. Wilker's fingers when he took them away from his head. Are you mad? He demanded. I took the question as rhetorical, but he answered himself. Of course you are. That much has been obvious since before we left Skirland. I knew it then. No sane woman would demand to be involved with this, but since you've gotten here, once there's been a quiet night or two, people will begin to accept it, Jacob said. Isabella is right. Astomir will certainly not come back, not tonight. Mr. Wilker made an inarticulate noise of frustration. He doesn't have to. The villagers don't want us here, and never have. Now they know that all they have to do to be rid of us is cause trouble tonight. Pleasure over my cleverness had been growing warmly inside me. His words were like a bucket of cold water dashed over the flame. I had thought about Astomir. I had not thought about everyone else. Then we'll just have to keep watch, I said, trying to sound confident. We, Mr. Wilker's eyes were bloodshot. He had not gotten any rest the night before. I remembered. That might have some bearing on his volatility now. I lifted my chin. Yes, I am not too delicate to go a night without sleep. I will stand watch alone or with someone else. Dagmara might join me, or Iljish. There are some people here sympathetic to us. From Jacob I heard a grim murmur of not many, but I paid it no heed. Science will triumph, Mr. Wilker. I will not be driven out of Drusenev by peasant superstition. His murmur was rather more audible than Jacob's. No, by peasant pitchforks and torches. But apparently he considered the argument at an end, for he stormed out of the workroom. I wondered if I had won or lost. I think that we better stop it here. I like to make these about 26 minutes long. Anyways, we have been reading from A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir by Lady Trent. It is a book by Marie Brennan. And if you like this book, then make sure you like it. If you like this content, rather, then make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me anyway, all that information will be in the description below, along with a link to the Discord server. Anyways, with all that being said, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.